Welcome to the Afropolitan Podcast, hosted by Eche, Emole, founder of Afropolitan. On the show, we chat with Afropolitans whose footprints form the foundation of systems dedicated to building the future of a bold and progressive Black community. In each episode, our guests share their working formulas, the hard facts about leaving familiar terrain, embracing the unknown, and staying relevant afterwards. Listen as we extract the blueprints of fearlessness, innovation, and progress.
In today's episode, we chat with Naithan Jones, former partner at venture capital firm A16Z and current head of growth at Royal. Royal enables anyone to own and earn royalties for their favorite songs. Naithan talks about the misconceptions about being a VC and Royal's mission to redistribute the ownership of digital property. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You're listening to the Afropolitan Podcast. We have Naithan Jones on the podcast, formerly A16Z, but head of Royal. The whole idea of the podcast, bro, is we don't get to tell our stories enough as Black people. Right. And one of the things we had said was back in the day, we passed down tradition and knowledge and wisdom through oral tradition. And that was how the elders did it. But today, the new oral tradition is our podcast. Right. And it's our way of preserving that knowledge, not just for the audience of today, but for the audience of the future. Right. And I think for me, this is something where I always make time to do these podcasts because it feels like my way of honoring the people who've come before and the people who are even coming right now, right? Because for too long, we don't do a good job sometimes in the Black community of honoring the people who have done the work, the people who have been in the arena, win, lose, or draw. There's something to be drawn from that. And I think I always want this podcast to be a way in which we honor the builders, right? The people who've really walked that path. And honestly, bro, I'm happy to have you on the podcast.
Man, I'm happy to be here. I've gotten a chance to really get to know you, know Chica, and know some of the people involved in the project. But, you know, obviously the project is impressive. It's ambitious. But, you know, just getting to know you as people as well and what you stand for and your principles. And, you know, I rock with that. I rock with the way that you guys move. You're true to who you are. And you're grounded in that. So, you know, it's been a pleasure, you know, getting to know you guys and become friends. And it's also made me exceedingly proud to see the progress.
It's just day one, my bro. It's day one. But I mean, we could definitely catch up more after the podcast because definitely got quite a lot to fill you in on, right? Because I think, like, bro, I'm not going to lie. In my circles, we look up to you and to a lot of your tweets a lot. I'm not going to lie. Like, when I'm talking to my guys who have, no, I'm telling you seriously, like, because what we see is the wisdom, right? Because, you know, like, you know, when you're younger, you know, we're all invincible when we're younger, right? It's like, bro, you couldn't tell me shit when I was 20, right? I saw everybody above 30 as a problem, right? And then you get to 30. It's true. You get to 30, and then the youngins are looking at you the same way. You like, all right, we all gonna walk this road. You see this road? We all gonna walk it. And so for us, like, when I talked to my boy, you met my boy Onyi one time, and we talk, I'm like, look, Nate has that wisdom where it's like, you check each other, right? The ego checks, the whole thing, where it's like, you gotta have this perspective, because I know when we were younger, we'd be saying YOLO, but this life is long. You feel me? It's a long life, and you gotta have that perspective that lasts across the board, because if you get caught up in that, your own hype, shoot, it's gonna be a problem. There's going to be a problem. So you got to have that perspective.
Yeah, it's going to be a bumpy road. You know, I try to help younger people not have to go through some of the bumps that I went through, you know, and hard-headedness and sometimes just life, just dealing with life and understanding yourself and getting to know yourself. One thing I am proud about this generation is there seems to be a greater focus on this generation of spirituality, of mental health, of, you know, really doing inner work, which is, you know, that wasn't in our lexicon when I was growing up. That wasn't a part of our dialogue, and that wasn't a part of our culture growing up. And to see that become a part of the culture has been great to see. I do worry that it's become fashion.
Yeah.
And that people are wearing mental health, and some people are wearing mental health, and some people are wearing spirituality for fashion.
Yeah.
There's definitely some of that. But nevertheless, the fact that it's being encouraged in the first place is great to see.
Yeah. I saw your tweet earlier today about the boss's tweet, right? Going back to your idea of it's now fashionable. We're going to pin it to the show notes, but let me pull up what the tweet said. And I really wanted to get your thoughts on this because we've talked about this internally as well, where it's like people who want to look the part, but not actually be the part, right? And so the tweet said, we have a boss epidemic. People want to be bosses who are not built for the risks, the periods of unstable income, etc. Just watching TikToks about bossing up, fantasizing about money, clout, and titles, but want to skip the 10 plus years of sorrowful, humble building that precedes it. Bro, that tweet, it touched me here, bro, right here. Can you speak to like what informed that mindset anyway?
So, I have a lot of conversations around this, and I think the quick reward of social media kind of incentivizes you to craft your image around the image of success with the hopes that it will get you there. Like, if I look successful people will want to work with me. That will open up doors for me to speak at conferences or get interviewed by highly esteemed publications. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. That's kind of the philosophy around it, right? Which people have. And there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how success actually happens. How success actually happens is you pick something to work on that you don't mind working on in the wee hours of the night for 20 plus years. And you are so entranced in the technicalities and the minor details of this problem and becoming better at solving it or understanding things that other people don't understand. You want to become so good at it that there's a level of craftsmanship that you're dedicated to. In that process, you become so good at it over time that doors begin to open to you because you begin to separate yourself from your peers who haven't put in the work, haven't put in the effort, and don't have the talent. And so a dedication to a craft, a skill, or a field, a deep, deep dedication to it that is so serious that success is a fait accompli. It's a foregone conclusion. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, but it's not coming tomorrow. But in our current world, when we go into Instagram or when we go into TikTok or whatever, all we see is everybody is successful right now. 99% of the things you're looking at are not real. The house is not theirs. It's either rented or it's an Airbnb. The car is a lease. The jewelry is borrowed. The vacation was paid for by somebody else or a conference, or their work paid for them to be somewhere on business, and they're pretending like this is their vacation or whatever. There's a lot of things that people do online to make it seem like everybody is successful. And what that will give you is a sense that I'm a failure. If these are my peers and this one's in Barcelona and that one is in Paris, and they're eating at Michelin star restaurants, and and now they've got this picture with them and little baby, and then they've got this picture with them and Elon over here, and oh my God, what am I doing? You know what I'm saying? So I encourage people to put in the work around their talent, and a lot of times, I would say more than half the time, what people are good at, they don't actually like to do. They want to be good at something else that somebody else is good at, and which is crazy. But what you hear from people who dedicate themselves to what they're already talented at is, after a few years of being so good at it, I became world-class and elite. The feedback loop and what I was getting out of it became the fulfillment. Even though at first I hated it because I'm so good at it, it's so easy to me, but I just don't want to do it. And this isn't everybody, obviously, but dedicating themselves to that, the fulfillment and the gratification of their work alone, being able to contribute, brings a deep set of meaning to your life that you don't understand until you've been deep in it for a while. That sense of meaning ultimately trumps everything else. Yeah. That becomes the success. And then everything else becomes it becomes a symptom of that. The money, the cloud, all these other things become a symptom of that over time. I'm 47 years old. I have been in tech for 25 years. So when I'm on the internet talking, I think some people think, well, you just showed up into tech the last couple of years just like everyone else, just like me. And I think the internet, what it does is it kind of collapses time and makes it feel like everybody's on the same social media timeline, right? We're all on this timeline, this social media timeline. And since I just discovered your account 3 months ago or a year ago, then it feels to me like you've only been grinding for a year. And now you've got all these followers, you've got all these things going on, all these other things. And so we have this very skewed idea of time and this compressed idea of time and what it took from a contribution state to get from here to here. When in reality, before I even discovered Twitter, I'd already been in the industry working for 16 years, 17 years before I even discovered Twitter. So, you're talking about my tweets. Certainly my tweets have helped give me some profile. I got some really funny stories around that.
It gives context. We attended our first South by Southwest this year, and I remember we were there for almost like a week. And I want to touch on the day of service. I remember we were in the group chat. You posted about the day of service, and the morning we woke up tired because we had been out the night before. And she was like, "Yo, are you sure we want to make this because we're tired?" And I said to her, like, from my perspective, I've reached a point where I've played enough of the status games, or been in the status games enough where this is what people are here for, that when I leave interactions and I don't have the meaningful situations, I then say to myself, you need to stop. It needs to be like this now. It needs to be upside down, where you seek the meaningful interactions more. And then if you happen to be in the status games industry or environment, you can dabble in it, but it cannot be the mission. The mission is the meaningful interactions. I was like, we have to go for the day of service, because I know that anyone who takes the time out to do this, even if they're tired or even if it means something. This is where we're going. And bro, we saw how that whole day panned out, right? And so for me, it validated what I felt throughout the period, which was like, look, serving and being able to serve others takes a level of humility. Most people think they just do it normally. It's like, no. It's like, if people are biblical, but when Jesus washes the feet of the back, it's like, that's service right there. It's not always riding the chariot or being at the top. It's literally being able to come down to the worst of the worst situation and humble yourself and realize that it's a perspective thing, right? How would you say serving like that has helped really change your perspective about life and just humanity in general?
Well, I think it grounds you. We lose context of our humanity so much because we work and we're looking, and we look at everything around us. We look at everyone around us. We compare ourselves all the time. And what that ends up doing is that obscures our idea of our humanity, and we lose context and we lose contact with our humanity. And the source energy necessary to create has to come from a place where you are going back to the essence of what we are, who we are as like a community, as a people, right? When you serve others, you strip down and become, like you said, you become the most vulnerable version of yourself. Everything that you were complaining about or stressed about or worried about becomes tiny, solvable, right? You were out there with us. We humanized people that are never humanized.
Yeah.
They had names, they had stories, they had smiles with us. We shared time with them. These were addicts. These were people with mental illness. These are people who are on the street living in encampments. And we were out there, and nobody distanced themselves from the situation. Everybody was like, the people wanted a hug. These are people who nobody touches them. They're getting hugged, and people are hugging them and feeding them and talking and laughing. And what came out of that was, for context, this was South by Southwest this year. We put together a day of service for people visiting town to come out and serve at the homeless encampments. There's a huge homeless crisis in Austin, and the enforcement of it and the laws that have been passed has created an incredible situation that has not been easy. And so we volunteer with these groups, and I offered that to several people visiting for South by. And Eche, you and Chica are two people who showed up out of like 25, 30 people. And it was an amazing day. And afterwards, we all broke bread together. And many people said it was the highlight of their South by experience.
It was for me.
Yeah. Because it was like, I'm not Nate Jones here. You're not Eche here. He's not Naithan here. Here, we're just the guy passing out fruit. I'm the guy pouring water. She's the person giving out clothes and blankets. You see what I'm saying? Like, so all of that stuff was washed away, and you start asking yourself questions when you're in situations like that. Like, why do I do what I do? What does my life mean? What am I doing what I do for? And it helps you recontextualize, right? It's not deep. You know, it didn't require like a huge philosophical session. Just getting in contact with other human beings and serving them. It recontextualizes you and flattens everything immediately. And it did that. And the gift really was to us, not really to the unhoused people. Really, we were the ones that were getting blessed out of the situation. We met Mama Red. She's this very spiritual woman, lives in the woods. She's almost like the spiritual kind of overseer of all these hundreds of people who live back there. This older lady in her late 60s prayed for us. She prayed for us.
Yes.
And it was a very intense experience, but it was magical. It was like a gift. So I appreciate you guys coming out, but I also am glad because I feel like once somebody does something like that, they pass it on to others. They pass that lesson on to others. They go serve and invite other people to go serve in different capacities wherever they go, but they take that spirit of service with them.
They do. They do. And honestly, I can't thank you enough for putting it together, for even inviting us. That was the highlight of my South by Southwest experience. But Nate, let's transition into the journey into your past. How did you get started into tech? And you're a former investment partner at A16Z. Could you talk us through the journey to becoming a partner at A16Z as well?
Yeah, lots and lots of cognac. Lots of yak. No, I'm kidding. Shout out to the OG, Ben Horowitz. You know, we like to sip a little bit of yak, and we like to barbecue. You know, smoke some meat, do some great Q, and kick it. We have a good time.
He's such a hip hop fan too. I remember when I read the Hard Things About Hard Things, and I'm a whole fan to the end, right? I was just like, he's pulling out, because like sometimes some white people will be like, "Oh, I'm a hip hop fan," and you're like, "Yeah, you really?" But he's pulling out the quotes where I'm like, "Oh wow, I didn't even get the context."
It's deeper than just hip hop; it's culture, man. Because we would get into deep philosophical, conversations about W.E.B. Du Bois versus Booker T, and we would talk about Marcus Garvey's vision and how futuristic it was, which I think Afropolitan is very Garveyite.
Yes.
And its, philosophies. We would talk about the Chitlin Circuit and how the DNA of modern music came out of the Chitlin Circuit. We talk about art. We talk about music. We talk about the importance of American sports in the civil rights movement. Jackie Robinson and others, Warren Moon and others like them that crossed the color lines, and the importance of what that was, the importance of art and translating culture and translating the human experience, how African Americans have just been consistently world-class contributors to the American experience through ways of art, through ways of music, through ways of expression, spoken word, rap, jazz, rock, blues, classical music, just can go very deep, into that. And we vibed just right there, just talking about how, and I think there's a general understanding, I don't want to speak for it, but I think it shows in the action to where technology, especially technology platforms, whether that's marketplaces or whether that's tools or whatever have you, they don't matter unless the culture decides to define them. Every single platform is defined by culture. Twitter is defined by culture. Black Twitter, look at it. Every single platform that has become an important staple in the way that we communicate, the way that we do commerce, the way that we collaborate, the way that we discover what's around us. Every single platform has been defined by culture. And so the two things go together invariably. Culture and technology have to go together. You can't just have the world-class engineer. You have to have the world-class cultural genius. And if those two people are the same person, then you have a once-in-a-lifetime talent. But, you know, if you can get that on a founding team, then you also have a breakthrough. And I think that's been sort of like the philosophy that we've spent a lot of time just talking through, like how important Black culture is to translating experience. You know, it's been critically important to the contribution of America's story. You know, it doesn't happen without it. You know, shout out to him. He's one of my great friends and a great mentor, and who really, really broke me into Silicon Valley. I showed up to Silicon Valley with nothing, literally. I sold everything I owned and drove out in a old 1994 Corolla back in 2011. And with everything I owned in the trunk, I met Chris Lyons. We became roommates in this residency incubator program. He had a company at the time, and we became best friends. And then we started hanging out with Ben all the time and just kicking it. And I was building Ag Local, which is a marketplace company. A16Z ended up investing in that. But shout out, you know, because when I got to Silicon Valley, I'm telling you, I could count on two hands the amount of African Americans I knew that were either running venture firms or running venture-backed companies. I mean, you had Marlon Nichols, you had Tristan Walker, you had myself, Aaron Teague, Eric Moore. You really only had a few people, man.
Yeah.
And then in 2013, 2014, you kind of started seeing this influx into Silicon Valley. Facebook was booming. Uber had started to become the thing. Airbnb had started to become the thing. All of those companies are Web 2 companies that got really accelerated during that period. And, you know, a lot of kids coming out of school from our neighborhoods were being encouraged to take these $150,000 a year, $200,000 jobs to go work in consulting or at the banks. And their classmates were going out west to live 5, 6, 7, 8 to an apartment, coding and building. And they'd come back to the class reunions and they'd be like, you know, crazy money. And I'm over here working, you know, at Goldman.
100 hours a week.
120 hours a week. And suddenly that 180K ain't looking so sweet. And I want that tech job now. You know, I want that. So you finally got the risk aversion started to dissipate. Because these were kids that a lot of times for us, it was the first generation college.
Yes,
so,
yes. The 6 figures.
Crazy money. But, you know, that started to dissipate, and you started to see us come into the industry. And right around 2014, I mean, it was a huge movement and a lot of social movements. You know, shout out to Toasted Life. You know, Warren and Matt, shout out to them. They really built a community out. Shout out to Morgan DeBon building out Afrotech and Blavity and all that. And just different communities started to really bloom. And so, you know, it's been amazing to watch. I ran my company for 4 years across 9 different geographies, cities, raised 3 successive rounds of venture capital, and then crashed it. Grew it too fast, didn't have control of unit economics, crashed company, failed, first time CEO. And, you know, and then found my way to Andreessen Horowitz right after that. Ben was like, I really want to work with you. And I was like, wow, really amazing. And was at Andreessen Horowitz for 7 years, where we did some amazing work from 2014 to 2021. I was there and did some really amazing work, you know, and the experiences were incredible. So, yeah.
What misconceptions about being a VC did you have before you joined A16Z, and how did some of those misconceptions change after the fact? And the reason I ask this is sometimes there's people who've not who don't understand a VC perspective, there are always like thoughts or like, criticisms about like, oh, they did this to us. What were some of the misconceptions you had about being a venture capitalist? And now, how do you approach it? And what advice would you give to founders who are thinking about taking VC capital?
Well, first of all, you have to understand, like, there's different classes of venture capital. And they all have, like, different models attached to them, and there's different motivations. At the class of Andreessen Horowitz, which is now in a class of its own, there is no other peer, really, to what they're doing. But for the period of time I was there, they had peers, Koya and a few others were peers. And when you have over $1 billion worth of assets under management, over $3, $4, $5, $6, $7 billion of assets under management, and your endowments are like the top endowments in the world, Ivy endowments or CalPERS or some of the other big endowments that are like a stamp of your excellence. Like, you can't get those endowments. Like, being invested into by Andreessen Horowitz, by a founder, is a big sign. Being invested into by certain Ivy endowments or CalPERS or whatever for a venture firm is like, you are the venture firm, right? You are the gold standard. So one thing that's really hard for first-time founders who are inexperienced in the ecosystem to understand about big blue chip firms is they don't really invest in businesses. They're not investing in businesses. They're investing in consolidated interest. And let me qualify that statement. A startup is not a business. It's a conversation about a business. And so the early team inside of a startup is having a conversation around the new market. And new markets are either expansions of existing markets or underserved portions of existing markets, or completely new efficiencies that allow new participants in a market that didn't participate in a market before. And the startup is basically a big bucket that collects all the value from that new idea that wasn't being collected. And so it's a conversation about a business, but it starts as a conversation around value creation, and it's a conversation internally, and it's a conversation with the actual customers. Because you're not a mom and pop, even though you're the size of a mom and pop business at first, and you're not a big Fortune 500 corporation. You're this other thing. And what this other thing is an experiment. And so I'm going to run 100 experiments, and this is the model of venture capital. Some people don't understand that the LPs inside the plan of these firms, the LPs have signed off on the venture math. And the venture math is this: 75% of all companies we invest in are probably going to go bankrupt. Another 10% are going to break even. And then the remaining 15% are going to return everything times 5. And if we're a blue chip firm, times 10. Our entire fund, times 10. And sometimes even times 15, times 20, when we have outrageous home runs, right? And so when you go to a venture capitalist and you're talking to a blue chip firm, and I've seen this mistake happen so many times, and you're like, hey, I want $1.5 million is what we're raising, or $2 million is what we're raising to go after this $200 million market. And it's like, okay, I have to, as a venture capitalist, I have an deployment window of 18 months or 2 years. I have to deploy $1 billion. I can't deploy $1 billion, $2 million at a time. If you come in and you ask me for $40 million, let's talk, right? And the other side of that is like, people come in there and they're like, but I have great unit economics, and I'm acquiring customers, and we're growing 10% year over year on all these other things. And it's just like, okay, but now I have to put a valuation on the business, where I'd rather not put a valuation on the economics of the business until it becomes a business. So what I'm really looking for is consolidated interest. And what I mean by that is, can the company capture the imagination of the market through press, culture, the product, the team building the product is a rock star team, and that they're going to have an unfair advantage getting partnerships, getting into rooms with other companies that are going to give them a huge moat in exclusive partnerships and things like that? Can I get consolidated interest around a market idea that essentially either opens up or expands a market very quickly? And is this the team to be able to go and do it? Can they iterate fast enough, build a product, capture value, capture the imagination of the market, by being able to express a simple to understand yet powerful value proposition that works, even if imperfectly, and that customers are willing to use it and use it and use it, even though it's not perfect yet. And even though the product isn't perfect or the profit margins may not even be perfect, that it is gaining users that are willing to part with their credit cards or some other signification of intent that is a real signal of intent very quickly. And that is the definition of consolidated interest. Consolidated interest in disruptive markets. So when people come in there like, I'm growing at this rate, my unit economics are this, I can literally do the math and say, that's a $400 million business in 10 years. Great business. And for you personally, when you exit that business, you're going to have $20, $30 million personally in 3 years, 4 years. And you should build that business. But the rejection coming from the blue chip firm, people will take that personally like, they don't think I got a good business. They don't know what they're talking about. No, it's just that there's a mismatch right there, which is you're building a business it's an incredible business. And I encourage, and there's another side to this as well, where founders they all want to be Elon Musk. They all have to be this biggest boss. And I've told a few of them that are building business, like, what's wrong with, like, when I look at your business, and you're coming out of a situation where you come from a poor neighborhood in Southwest Atlanta, and then now you're building a business that if you stay on the current trajectory, you'll probably exit that business $250 million, which will net you 15, 20, 30, $40 million personally, depending on how much you still own of it. Why do you need to go in and take dilutive capital right and go and try to build this other thing that you don't even know if it works when the thing you have is working? And if you just keep doing this for the next 2.5 years, you're going to have this exit. And then you can go back and chase the big multi-billion-dollar dragon later, but change you and your family's life. What's wrong with building a $50 million business for your first business? It's not attractive to Sequoia, but it's going to change your life right now. And you already have the ingredients. It's working. So I think sometimes people get caught up in having to do things a certain way because that's the popular thing they see on the internet and what's coined as success. And now we're back to square one of this conversation, right? And I think it's perfectly okay to build a business for couple of years and exit it for $50 million. And boom, you get your $10, $15 million, which is going to build you and your family a great life. And then now you have the foundation of which to go take real risks on these moonshot companies and not risk your whole life on these things, trying to chase the dragon of I have to go public, I have to go IPO, I have to raise, I saw this person raise 80 million, I need to raise 100 so I can post that on my Instagram so I can be a bigger boss. Like all of those things are like just the wrong way of thinking about it, right? So it's just some of those mismatches sometimes get reinterpreted as they didn't like me, it was personal, they don't understand my business. And people really personalize that stuff when sometimes there are just other motivators in place that are not aligned. That's it.
I'm so glad you've broken this down succinctly, and I'm sure we're going to keep this particular explanation on the loop. The reason why I'm asking is I've been in rooms or I've been in situations where founders, whether they're African founders or Black founders, who are more than most underrepresented in the space, might come into it and say, hey, I'm only raising $1 million or I'm raising only 500,000. And then when they get rejected, they're thinking, but I'm raising so small, I'm not even trying to take the whole pie. And you just broke this down in a way where it doesn't fit into the unit economics from a VC standpoint. But what advice do you then have to founders who do face the other challenges of where the racism maybe shows up, or maybe there's a pattern match that doesn't really pattern match? What advice do you have in terms of how to still approach your business? Because you've laid it out perfectly. Your business doesn't have to be $100 billion exit. 50 million is still okay. 20 million is still okay. But what advice do you give to them to think through the process? Because some founders now are more excited about the TechCrunch article about the fundraise than the actual exit,
Exactly. That's the thing that's gotten so toxic. And I'll just say this. Two things can be true at the same time. Racism can be real, and there can be people out there who are assholes. And at the same point in time, it can be something that you can't sit there and don't have the time to sit there and dwell upon.
Yes.
For you, like there's no way to truly eradicate bias out of the world. It will always be with us. It's always been with us since the beginning of time. People always find a way to separate with each other. It's been proven. No matter what group has been oppressed, they internally oppress. And then those groups internally oppress. The human condition is to do that. Is to separate, divide, create power dynamics, reasons for why one person's better than another. We know the history of this country. We know that it exists in certain pockets. We know that you can walk into rooms and there's going to be some people who have no experience with your culture and they're going to look at you like, okay, I don't get it. That can be true and it can be wrong, and we can acknowledge that as being wrong. And at the same point in time, I can't fix the world as a founder. I can't fix the entire world, but what I can do is be excellent. My way of fixing the world is me being excellent. So instead of me wasting time and energy on this person over here who clearly has an issue, I now have to focus on what I can control, being excellent, moving forward. At the end of the day, thinking about focusing in like all your attention on the ways in which you're being victimized and you're a victim, that gets into your psychology. It gets into your psychology and it really doesn't. It can't help you because you're never going to change. A real racist, a person who's truly racist, you'll never change them. You'll never change them. Yeah. They have made up their mind. There's nothing you can do. You're inferior to them.
Yeah.
And I don't want to change their mind. I don't really care. If that's where you're at, I don't care. I got to build. I got to move forward. There's enough customers in this world. And this is not to say that you don't put pressure on an industry to say, hey, look, there's a lot of ideas out here that because of cultural reasons, they're not being heard. And I'm a huge proponent of that, and I've built programs around that. We built TXO because of the misunderstanding of how talent is distributed. And I think some of those things are cultural social, which is to say, I know how to match competency only around this group because this is the only group I've ever been around. Yeah. To those people, they would say, I don't feel like I'm a biased person. Of course, that's not true. Of course, they're biased. What they're really admitting to is I have no experience. I have limited competency to understand how to look at you and value your talent because I just don't have the world, life, or social experience to do so. But instead of admitting that, they will come up with all these other weird defenses and they'll go back into a shell. People inherently love to work with people who come from their culture. We watch the same TV shows. Our parents punished us the same way. We listen to the same music. We have the same slang. There's less of an onboarding on-ramp for me to understand and translate to this person. So I'm going to work with them because it's easier. That's just laziness. That's pure laziness. But it's at the root of some of the bias, not all of the bias, some of the bias. And so you have to understand those waters when you're navigating them. I didn't come up privileged. I graduated high school late. We didn't have a lot of money. I've been homeless in my life. I've lived in the back of a car. I wasn't economically privileged, but I was culturally privileged. And the reason why I'll say that is my dad was in the military, my stepdad, and we had to go to Germany. He got stationed in Germany. And instead of getting free housing on the base, on the Air Force base, he decided we should live in the German countryside. And his thing was, to me, if you're going to make friends, you're going to have to learn to speak German. You're going to have to learn to talk to the German kids. And I lasted about a month of just playing by myself, kicking it by myself before I broke down, went outside and tried to explain what I was talking about to them and them to me. And after a while of doing that, building friendships and then learning German by osmosis. Biggest favor ever done to me, cultural privilege. Why? Because it stripped me of the notion that when I walk into rooms of people who don't look like me, who don't speak my cultural language, who I can't use any cultural touchstones as a way of relating to as a social lubricant, that I literally have to go in with a mindset of putting my ego and guard down, being vulnerable, and having to learn from scratch about these people, that I didn't have the fear to do it. And many times what holds us back is we walk into these rooms and what we're really saying is it's too hard to be this vulnerable. I have to completely start from scratch with no social lubricants or helps or anything. And I have to learn about these people in an uncomfortable way. And I wish it was like this in this room. When really you should look at that as your advantage. right? Because if you're willing to go places people aren't willing to go, and you're willing to do things people aren't willing to do, and you're willing to do that over and over again, there's a cumulative interest that is being built upon your life of relationships that will open, things you will learn, esoteric knowledge you will learn in conversation, overhearing things, being in these rooms that isn't in a business school. It isn't in a book you can buy on Kindle or Audible, but it was only in that place for that time and is only valuable information for a limited period of time. And you can activate that knowledge that is valuable for the limited period of time during that window because you were there. But you have to be willing to take risk. You have to be willing to lower your ego, and you have to be able to be uncomfortable in places where you have no familiarity. That is honestly the learning experience, but that is kind of the cultural privilege that I was given, that education.
Bro, you preaching heavy right now. I'm over here like, man, this might have to be like a 3-hour podcast, bro, because there's just so much. Because as you were talking, I now started to think through the role of healing from the PTSD that we collectively have as Black people, right? What role does healing play where you now see the trauma from the past and you're like, you know what? I can't let the past trauma affect our ability to move forward in these spaces, right? Because so many times you see it where it's like you walk into a situation, maybe we're not socially equipped to navigate those rooms, and we mentally exclude ourselves from those rooms without actually being physically excluded yet, right? And so I guess I wanted to ask, like, what role would you say maybe therapy or the healing process has played through your journey, even in this tech ecosystem?
A huge part of it, shout out Carl Jung, Eckhart Tolle, many other authors, reading about the subconscious, the software that runs spiritually and psychologically in the background from our experiences. Some of them experiences have been blotted out from our conscious memory, and some of them haven't, and how we digest it and the defense mechanisms we used to survive those experiences when they happened. But, how much of that pain, humiliation is still in us, or we're looking at the world through these glasses, right? And in order to see the world correctly, you have to see yourself correctly. That's the hardest thing, which is the honesty it takes to look at yourself in a real way, because we build up all of these myths around ourselves. All of our stories get remixed as either hero or victim stories. I'm either the hero of this story or I was a victim in this story. There's never a story where it's like, this was wrong and I was the victim, but then I also did this other thing where I was wrong, and that thing that I did wrong created trauma. And then we never have this balanced view of ourselves. We never strip down and look at ourselves and see the human experience for what it really is. It's a complicated thing. The person that you are now is not the person you were last year. You're a completely different person. You may like completely different things. You may have a completely new set of people in your life. You may believe entirely different things politically. You may have an entirely different spiritual outlook, right? And then that's all based upon your lived experience in the world, which has changed. You've taken on some trauma. You've released some. That changes the way you kind of move around in the world, right? And so, yes, there is a toxic thing where we are associating in a very limited one-dimensional way the Black experience around trauma. And the Black experience is very encompassing. It's very rich, very full. Our personal experiences are very different from each other. My experience is very different from you. It's very unique to me. But, I do think that the pandemic, for me, was a huge step forward. Also, I had a failed marriage. And at the end of that, I went through a spiritual experience that allowed me to see. I had a psychedelic experience without drugs. Through meditation and breathing, I literally found myself in a psychedelic experience that lasted for 4 or 5 hours and was very intense emotionally. And coming out of that experience, I began to just see the world and myself and and my family and everything differently. It was like consciousness was just slightly shifted. I saw the toxic energy vibrationally of words. I could see it, what words do, and how they can actually heal as well. I saw that everything around me had a vibrational energy, everything. And how I interacted with the world, it's like sending ripples across a pond. This one little thing creates all of these vibrational ripples and all of these second order effects that you don't expect, both good and bad.
Yeah.
That your world is essentially a reflection of what is going on inside of you. And so if you have chaos going on inside of you, if you have war going on inside of you, your world is constantly going to be in conflict. There's always going to be conflict around you. You're going to be in an argument in traffic with somebody, or, you're just going to attract that energy in. And the same thing about coming to peace with yourself. Us as men, when I speak to us as men, we are inherently always at conflict with the world, which means we're always at conflict with ourselves, because there's messages that the world is always telling us about the way to define our masculinity, which may or may not be true always for us individually, which creates a division inside of us where we're opposed to ourselves. So we're not integrated anymore, which means we lack integrity. And so many men are walking around with a lack of integrity because they're not integrated, because they're divided against themselves. There's all these expectations of what my masculinity means, what my humanity means, who I am versus what is really true. Coming to peace with yourself, calling a truce, waving the white flag, making sure the war inside, the internal war, is over and coming to a place of peace. Your world around you then settles. The noise level goes down.
Yeah. And you can then pick up on the vibrations. Bro, I see COVID as the black swan event that forced a lot of us, it forced even me to sit down with my choices for the first time, right? Like sit down with it where there was no noise, where you literally had to sit with your thoughts, your reflections, your actions, and ask yourself, is this how I want my life to play out, right? What can I do differently moving forward? But I wanted to transition and go from the transition from A16Z to Royal. Can you talk to us first through Royal's mission and what about their vision inspired you to join over there?
So first of all, I'm just going to say this. Like I've been in Web3 since 2017, 2016. Shout out to Fred. Met them in the early days of Coinbase, and Brian too. I was at the dinner where we met Nas and introduced them guys together, and that became a legendary moment. Met the Diaspora Labs team very early on when CryptoKitties was hot. Helped them think through their consumer strategy, ended up introducing them to Melissa Brenner at the NBA, which became Top Shots. And so have had the good fortune of working in this space because of Andreessen Horowitz, because of Ben Horowitz. I had the good fortune of being able to work in this space from the early point of view. So even though I'm not a technologist per se, I understand technology at a level of how to translate it to culture and consumer adoption. And so I always understood, at least from a basic standpoint, that this technology had the possibility here that property rights could be unbundled and redistributed, which means a redistribution of wealth, which means an expansion of the economic mobility ladder. So I always looked at crypto or Web3 as that, especially NFTs, because if I can assign an NFT to some sort of property right, whether it's a copyright or some sort of voting rights to something, then I'm essentially creating an unbundling of wealth. Wealth has always been transferred through the history, through modern history, since property. First of all, property rights, one of the biggest breakthroughs in modern history. Property rights in and of themselves and the protection of property rights has been, poverty in the world was much, much greater than it is now. Before the idea of property rights was invented, and then governments chose to protect property rights, sometimes via military, sometimes via police. But as you know, in our history, it's something that we were inherently locked out of. Mm-hmm. So the powerful idea to me was that if people who have always been locked out of wealth were able to then, without being accredited investors, be able to buy small portions of copyrights, digital property, voting rights, things like that, then essentially it was a huge expansion of the mobility ladder to the lower middle class and the impoverished. Huge, right? because I could build up true ownership in something which is completely different than cash. As we see today, inflation can burn cash to nothing. Ownership is the real thing. Coming from a music background, like my dad would work with famous musicians growing up. He was the tour guitarist for The Who. Then he formed a band with John Entwistle from The Who called Rigor Mortis. And he went on tour with them. He made guitars for all kinds of people. Eric Clapton, all these people, they were in my house growing up. But his guitar designs actually were stolen by a major guitar manufacturer, which still makes those guitars today. We never saw a cent of that money. Again, ownership, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I always saw that music, especially like any IP, but especially music, because music is the obvious place to start, and the ownership of music being redistributed to non-accredited investors, not just big catalog buyers, which is what was happening today, was a breakthrough idea. I was just waiting for someone to start building it, and I'd been kind of researching the space. So when JD pitched me the idea of Royal, I immediately understood what it was. Now, I wasn't really ready to leave A16Z because things were sweet over there, but JD's a good recruiter. And so after a couple of weeks, diving in with him, he really convinced me to join. But that was the whole idea, is the redistribution of wealth and ownership. Ownership is a huge concept. Like, ownership to me is the biggest thing here. Everyone who's in Web3 is missing the entire point.
Yeah.
It's like they're burying the lead, which is like, everyone's focused on PFP projects and like cool utilities and all these other things. And I'm like, the basics and the foundation of this technology being the ability to redistribute digital property rights to unaccredited investors is the killer app. That's it. It just needs to be fashion brands selling a piece of their copyright. It needs to be movies selling commercial rights to characters, or like recoupment rights to the movie's receipts as it goes through the theater system. So, yeah, like a very powerful idea,
No, seriously, and it's very needed. I always tell people that Web3 to me represents finally our ability as even Black people or underrepresented people to capture the value that we always create. We're so great at creating the value, right? But when it comes time to capture it, we start to have issues with that. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, because we don't truly understand it. We don't understand it conceptually. And so I think that's the biggest struggle.
I agree. Nate, are there any books that have had a profound impact on your life?
Let me go through. I got to go through my top 10 list, man. I love it.
We'll just take three of them, because I know there are a lot. I'm sure there are a lot.
Let me go through. I'm going to sound like I'm kind of like being corny here, but Hard Thing About Hard Things was huge for me.
It's a top book, top.
Hard Thing About Hard Things was amazing to me as far as like how to build a company and think about it. There's a thinker who saw the future in ways, and his books are so insane. Norbert Wiener is his name. And he invented the field of cybernomics, which is philosophy and mathematics and computers. And this man has 3 different books, but Cybernetics was the book that really captured my imagination. And then the other book was The Human Use of Human Beings by Norbert. That was a huge one. It's very weighty, but it really shook me. Inner Engineering by Sadhguru. Very, very eye-opening as far as the first step into like thinking about how to re-engineer your inner self. Man, there's so many books I'm going through. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Yes, huge. Power versus Force, Energetic Frequencies. Power versus Force was amazing as a book to me. I like books on strategy. Have you ever read The Black Jacobins?
No.
Oh man, you got to read that. It's about the Haitian slave revolution.
Mm.
So, why was the Haitian slave revolution the the most successful slave revolution. And it goes into the fact that it was culture. The way that they did it was a cultural breakthrough. Why that was really the only successful
slave revolution.
Revolutionary movements.
Yeah.
Gosh, man,
you got some good books in there, man. You got some good books.
Man, I mean, I like reading on revolutions because I feel like revolutions tell you a lot about how culture and ideas really spread to create movements. And I'm always thinking about, okay, revolutions are what changes consumer platforms or what gets adopted. Psychology of the Unconscious by Carl Jung.
That's a real good list. So then I'm going to ask you this, right? If the only thing left in the world was to read a book about your life, right? What would the title of the book be?
Oh my God. You gonna make me title my own book?
Yeah, man, about your life. What would the title of the book be and why?
I was going to title a book called The Winter's Garden. When I started.
The Winter's Garden?
Yeah, because it's not really a harvest season. So how do you
harvest in winter?
You know, Kanye had a verse about, I'll show you how to cook up summer in the winter. And then Hove had a verse like that too. And it's about like, how do you thrive in seasons where it's barren, it's cold, you can't grow anything. And not all growth looks the same, right? So when I was hustling out of the car, I was inventing, what bear markets or what times of downturn or what times of disappointment or when people walk away from you or when you're not hot anymore or whatever it is, right? These are incredibly important times because you have permission to reinvent yourself and reimagine. And so the biggest mistake people make is they create a static version of who they're going to be their entire life or who they're becoming, and they adhere to that. And the truth is, you're becoming like 7 or 8 or 9 different things. And you're going to go through this metamorphosis and you're going to live this life. Then you're going to live that life. But when people become stuck and rigid around, I'm going to do this one thing, be this one thing, then I'm going to die. They frustrate their life, their own life, because their life wants to take them on this journey to this place, to this persona and to this experience. And they're like, no, I can't do that because I'm stuck on this. That's why I love the nomadic nature of Afropolitan, because you're not in that.
Yeah. It's expansive, and it's funny that you bring that back to Afropolitan, because we always ask all our guests, right? What does being Afropolitan mean to you?
It's a permanent, impermanent, shapeless, yet foundational community that is defined by, or network state that is defined by the citizens and is flexible, is always shifting in shape. It's a futuristic version of the Diaspora. It's individual and collective at the same time. So it's very beautiful.
All right. Honestly, Nate, like, I feel like this conversation could go on forever. I personally feel enriched. I feel like we're going to have you back because there's so many other questions we didn't get to. But the reason this particular episode was important to me is for too long, we've lived in silos. And I'm someone that's an Afropolitan. I've always felt like I move between portals, right? I'm at South by Southwest today. I'm in Austin with Nate. Tomorrow I could be in Kampala, Uganda. But there's a thread, right, that connects us as Black people across the diaspora and on the continent. My hope is that through podcasts like these, right, we tell these stories, but these stories transcend even time and space and even physical locations, right? And that really is why we're building this digital nation of this, because this is the state media for this country that we're building, you know? So Nate, honestly, a pleasure having you on board, bro. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Loved it, man. Thanks for having me on the state media.
Appreciate you, bro.
I appreciate you, my brother.
Thank you for listening to the Afropolitan Podcast. We are building the future of a progressive Black community. To join our community, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Afropolitan. Be sure to join our Discord and Clubhouse community by clicking on the link tree on our Instagram page. See you on social.